today for the Confident Sober Women podcast. I am so excited to be here with my friend Jo, and she's going to give us a quick update on what has been going on with her since the last time she was on our podcast about a year or so ago. And then we're going to just get into it. So, Jo, I'm going to turn the mic over to you, let you share a little bit more about all of that, and then we're just going to have a conversation.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you for having me back. It's awesome to be with you again. And yes, lots of changes since we last spoke. Last time I talked to you, I was in Cabo San Lucas, Mexico. I had moved there with my husband during COVID and retired. So now I am divorced in Reno, Nevada. It's a little colder here. And my new partner and I just launched a new website, which is going to be live next week, recoveryremix.com. So I'm back working in the addiction world and I'm loving it.
That's incredible. So I would love to hear just a little bit more about the inspiration for this new website and kind of what your mission is for your work. And I just want to hear all the details.
Well, it's fascinating. My partner is also in long-term recovery. He's been sober almost a decade from opiates and alcohol. And fascinating story. Pro snowboarder, got an injury and then spent the next 20 years dealing with addiction. So it's really nice. I've never dated anybody that's sober. So it's been a fun way to connect. There's just a different level of presence and clarity. It's really been cool. My last relationship, I was with someone who had quite a few different addiction issues. And so it's been like a big adaptation process for me as well. Just being comfortable in the calm has been a real shift. But we both have a real passion to get the word out that sobriety doesn't have to suck. I mean, there's just no other way to say it. It's incredible. We are thriving. There's no white knuckling. We don't have cravings. And he got sober using AA. For me, that was always a really uncomfortable environment for me. I'm so thankful that AA exists. I think the steps are phenomenal. I believe every person on the planet should do them. And we live in a much different world. But our goal with the online platform is to deliver our steps our way. So we've tweaked the formula to work better for us. And we want to give people an online alternative to going into meetings, but with the same accountability, the same working, the same shifting behaviors. But one of the things I think the steps miss, and I really had to deepen into this because like I said, I love them. But when we find those defects of character and we work so hard to change them, what never was driven home for me, at least when I was working the steps, was what's the wound? Why do those defects of character exist? What caused it? It's like, why the pain? Why the wound? Why did we develop those characteristics and ways of defending ourselves in the world? And then we can also remove them. But there was that other piece that I felt was missed. And it's interesting because last time we talked, I was just on a riff of personal responsibility, and I still am. That is still my jam 100%. But I feel exploring the wound and the trauma and where that came from is also part of us being responsible, because that's how I heal more effectively and more completely. And I make sure that those shifts stick. Anybody can change behavior momentarily, but until we really heal and identify why the hurt, I don't think we can just jump to the behavior change.
I love all of this. This is so incredible. And I like your partner, and I think you a little bit too. I got sober in AA, which I'm sure we talked about last time. And I want to just rewind. So thank you for that update and for the clarity on what you guys are doing. And I want to dig into all of that. But I want to rewind just a little bit and talk for a few minutes, and as much as you're willing to share, about your experience with the 12-step programs and why you said, I think the word you used was you never felt comfortable there. So I'm just really curious, because one of the things that I talk about in my work, in my program, is that there are a lot of ways to get sober. And I got sober in AA. I wouldn't trade it for the world, but it's not the only way. And also, it can be a both and situation. Like, I can still love AA and I got sober that way. And I can also incorporate a lot of other things and tools and strategies for myself to be well. And
Right.
so, but a lot of people in my community have the same experience, maybe not the same experience, but they have similar expressions about the 12-step programs related to how they felt, and that they didn't feel comfortable, or they didn't like it, or it didn't work for them. And so I always really, I'm curious to hear more about that, so that the audience can know kind of what that's about. And if you love AA like I do, it's okay too.
Yeah.
So I would like to hear what your perspective is.
No, and I appreciate that kind of leading into it, because even me, I can be hesitant to share any criticism on any level, because I think it's so important that people have that option. I would never want to turn anyone away from it. So I am truly saying this is only my experience.
Right, exactly.
The I tried AA when I was a lot younger, and one of the reasons I felt uncomfortable was because I would walk into meetings and then men were just instantaneously on me. And it really felt kind of predatory to a degree. And I thought, wow, this is really interesting. Like, I mean, yes, I get hit on or approached out in the real world, but in the walls of AA, there seemed to be more permission. And it felt like there was permission because I was vulnerable and people were using my vulnerability as an opportunity. And it really did not land well with me. And some of that, I'm sure, was my lens. You know, I have been sexually assaulted and have a long history with that. So some of that is I think that is the lens through which I see the world. So I could have been misinterpreting some of those advances, and some of them were really aggressive and obvious. So I didn't like that. So that was the first thing. The second thing was I didn't see a lot of people that were happy. They were sober and they were coming to the same meeting that they had for 20 years, and I commend that. But for me, I was looking for somebody that could be a role model for me, that had your energy, or like mine or my partners, that was, you know, that really were happy. They weren't trying to not drink. It just wasn't a part of their experience anymore.
Right.
And so what I found was like, no, you're an alcoholic. You're always an alcoholic, which, you know, I have different views on. Like, I say I'm recovered. I would never drink again, ever. But I also, it's like, you know, if I got shot, I could recover from that bullet wound, but I'm not bulletproof. But I just didn't want to live in that energy of I'm an alcoholic and this is my sad story and this is what a horrible person I've been, and I need to spend the rest of my life trying to not be an alcoholic. And I just really, that doesn't work for me. And that was a lot of the energy that I was finding.
Okay.
So those are probably the two primary issues why it didn't work.
And that makes sense. I mean, definitely the men part, I feel like, is pretty common. And I can see where there's other women kind of speaking up around that second piece that you're referring to. There's some other women in what I call this kind of modern recovery world who are sharing similar stories, and even people who came out of AA, but who don't really ascribe to the label of saying you're alcoholic or addict. I personally don't have a problem with it myself. Like, I feel fine and like actually good by saying, you know, like, look, I'm an alcoholic and addict. Like, I'm, you know, I'm a woman in long-term recovery. I use all kinds of different phrases depending on which environment I'm in.
Yeah.
But all of that applies to me, and it still means the same thing. Like, I'm a person that can't ingest any kind of mood altering substances. And so it means the same thing for me. I don't know if that's for you, but So thank you for sharing that. And I don't think it's any disparaging to the program. In fact, I still recommend it to most women, especially who are new. Like if people come in my community and they're struggling to get or stay sober, I still recommend it because I think for sure in the beginning, it's very, very helpful to have a
Yes.
fellowship around you of non-drinking people, and people who know how to do the work of getting and staying sober a little bit more than you do. So when you're first starting out and you're like struggling and trying to get out on the bandwagon, having other people who have gone before you is very helpful. I think even for the whole first year, I mean, there's a lot going on in the getting sober phase. It's kind of like being an infant. You have to relearn a lot of things. You might be in trouble. You might have like be, unhomed. Like there's a lot of things that are going on that need attention in that first year. But then what you're saying is exactly where I love to meet people is in that sort of after that first year to many more years, specifically around 1 to 5 years, but up until whenever is that sort of awakening that women start to have as we begin to stay sober for a long time. We start to wake up and say things like, who am I now? And what do I want
Yeah.
in my life? And, the desires of our heart start to kind of bubble up, and we're like, ooh, I want to do this, or I want to start a business, or I want to have a baby or go back to school. And these possibilities become real. They become real
Right.
options for us now, where they weren't before. And it sounds like your program is going to be somewhere in the middle of all of that, right? Who do you recommend?
Yes. Yeah, I mean, it's definitely, I like how you're talking about that initial hurdle phase. I mean, we are certainly not a substitute for therapy, for medical detox, for treatment, but once you're stable or you're really in that deciding phase, like even, I do a lot of coaching with women and men that are, they thrive in life. They really do. They weren't an alcoholic the way I was. I was a mess. Like there was no question. Like talk about the steps, like admitting you're powerless. I had no problem with that. I knew I was a train wreck and needed help. But my clients, they're really thriving, and a lot of them they own businesses. They're fantastic parents. They're well known in their communities, and it's just gotten a little out of control. And I really feel for people in that state because I'm almost grateful that mine was so horrible that I had to quit, because I truly believe that alcohol dampens our spirit. I do. And I would never judge anybody for doing it. I think if it is something that doesn't interfere with your quality of life, great. But for me, I am so thankful that I don't drink ever, not a little bit, because I believe that my spirit, my soul, my capabilities to connect with people, with myself, with my family, with this human experience is so protected and precious, because that's not a part of my life. So I feel for people when it's not that bad. They're not in jail, they're not in the hospital, they're not attempting suicide. But it's that shame. And it's that loss of control. And again, they're very high functioning professionals. They're CEO boss bitches everywhere in their life. But then there's this thing that has this hook in them, and it's scary.
Yeah.
It's scary. And so our program is also designed to meet people there, where you're really trying to process that. Can I moderate? And I love taking people through that process.
Yeah.
Of like, great, let's see, can you? It's funny because it's Sober October now, which I love. You've got big people with big platforms like a Joe Rogan. He does a Sober October every year. And I'm like, God bless that man for speaking this message out, because try it. I wish more people would try and just be clear for a month and then see. It's a great way. It's a great litmus test to see where you're really at. And I think it's so scary for so many people because they don't want to feel and they don't want to discover who they are without alcohol. But the other thing is, so much of life revolves around drinking. Like when I got divorced and I was like, well, I need to start working again. There were some people that wanted me to go into real estate, and I started watching what that looks like. And it's so much client cocktails and wine at an open house. And, even professionally, so much of life revolves around alcohol
True.
that it's challenging. And again, so I believe our program can meet people where they're at. If they're trying to get sober, if they are sober with a little bit of time under their belt, because you're right, the AA community, we cannot provide that online experience to what it means to go into a meeting and have some woman come up and say, hey, I see you and I'm here to help you. And I'm not going to charge you. And I'm going to be right there with you. It's so precious. And that person to person connection is really phenomenal. And that is one thing about the program that I do love so much. And again, the steps, they're brilliant. There's so much Eastern and Western wisdom in those steps that it's great. So yeah, I would say people that have their feet underneath them in sobriety, or people that are looking at, should I get sober? That's really our message is designed for those individuals.
Yeah, and I love what you said when you started and you described it as, getting to the wound. And that is so critical because that's all of life, whether you have a problem with your gut health, or you're getting frequent headaches, or there's some other medical issue. We do want to get to the root of the issue, and a lot of times even like modern medicine doesn't do that. We kind of mask it with like medications or whatever treatment is available to us, but they're not actually saying, well, why is this happening? And that's the kinds of questions that you're asking. And that's what's so good about working on our emotional sobriety and doing kind of that outside work beyond the steps, if that's your thing, or beyond that original first year of sobriety, because we all know now from the research that addiction comes from trauma. Like it doesn't just show up. When nobody was born anxious and depressed, like you might have a genetic predisposition, and those things, can be very real, but that we pile on the trauma, capital T and lowercase t traumas, that build the neuropathways in our brain that create the need to solve that problem or get out of the discomfort or numb out, and then we fill it with a substance, and we think that's the glue that's keeping us together.
Yes.
So then the question becomes like, how do we do that? Like, how do we get to the wound, And I'd be curious to hear again, and as much as you'd like to share, like when you were doing this work for yourself, what did you discover were those things for you?
Yeah, it's interesting because what I've found, and really, had to be honest with myself over the last year of untangling, like from a marriage that truly had become my addiction. Like I met my ex-husband when I was a year sober, and it is that classic trauma bond, and I didn't realize it until it was, I hate to say it, but too late. We were married, we were in it, I loved him, and it was just extremely dysfunctional. So here I am, I'm not drinking, but I have this other thing that's filling that hole. So yes, I was doing my work, but it was almost padded, if that makes sense. Like there was so much distraction, so much, dopamine spike, and then crash, and then chaos and turmoil within my relationship. It really allowed me to not do my work fully. And maybe that was the brilliance of it, right? Like maybe on an unconscious level, I set this up so that I could do it little by little. But I just had no real experience in managing painful emotions without some immediate reaction to get me out of it. So yeah, it used to be drinking, then it wasn't drinking anymore. Then it was yelling, then it was whatever I could do. And sure, things got better and less harmful to me and others, but there was still an inability for me to sit in my pain or discomfort. And getting divorced I have finally, I would never say mastered that, but I've been in it. And I mean, anybody that's gotten divorced, now do it sober. You know what I mean? It's a whole different ball game. And I can remember one night I had just left. I was like a week out, and I was driving up a hill, and my ex-husband was coming down the hill with a girl, like half my age in the car. And I saw it, and my girlfriend saw it, and it was one of those oh shit moments. And she looked at me, and I looked at her, and she's like, "Are you okay?" And I took a deep breath, and I was like, yeah. Like, I let myself just go into the most excruciating pain. And the second I did, I just kind of broke through it. It was like I was on the other side of the looking glass, and it hurt, but I accepted the hurt and I didn't run away from it. And I was like, oh my God, this is it. Like, I did it. You know, it's the first time I was like, I really actually did it. I felt it fully. I let myself embody that pain. And it
Wow.
was it was magnificent. And then I worked really diligently with an amazing coach over the last year. And we were in it. And that was my time. That 75 minutes out of the week, it was like I showed up in full transparency. And anytime she would notice me wiggle away from an emotion, we just went back into it, like somatically in my body with my breath. And I just felt it. And it was so beautiful to watch my little system unwind. Like, this person I thought I could never live without, I somehow had the courage to finally leave. And then not only that, like going through the legal process in another country and finance and like just nightmare. I can't even tell you. When I left, he had moved all of our money into an account I wasn't on. I was in another country with no money. Like, it was level 10 challenging, and I stayed with myself.
Yeah.
And it's been the most beautiful experience. And it was like, it finally hit me. Oh, he's not the source of my wealth. He's not the source of my love. He's not the source of anything. And it was this complete, like, I took my power back.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that was something I was sober, but I hadn't done yet.
Yeah, I can tell. I can feel it. That's incredible. And so, and you mentioned some other, you have a history of sexual assault and some other trauma, capital T traumas and other things, I'm sure. And so as you were kind of building out the work that you're doing now with your partner and kind of thinking about this concept of the root of the wounds, like for our character defects or our ways of being, were you able to identify some things further back, like that were the root cause of some of your challenges and character defects?
Yeah. And I had worked through a lot of the sexual trauma and being molested when I was younger, when I was in rehab. But what I didn't realize was there's different layers
Yes.
to that healing. And so I thought, no, I've worked through this. I'm good. One specific trauma I had not yet worked through because I had been drugged. I mean, literally did not remember it. I woke up in a hotel room in a bathtub, and I had been assaulted, and my phone had been wiped. All the sheets had been taken. This was I had a sense, very dangerous individual. So I didn't press charges. It was like I just got up and I flew home. And I did as much work around that as I could. Without remembering, I had a really intense healing ceremony where I guess I was just ready. I went into that hotel room, and I'm literally watching this happen to me. I'm watching what's happening to my body, and I grabbed my face and I was just like, you're going to be okay. I know it doesn't seem like it, but I'm right here with you, and you are going to be okay. And I did a lot of work integrating that experience, and that is the reason I'm able to be in a healthy relationship now. Like, I had so much sexual trauma in my body that I attracted somebody who was very sexually traumatizing. And that was part of that bond in my marriage. And I was terrified when I got out of that. I was very scared to date. I was exceptionally worried to repeat those patterns and be attracted to somebody again with, that kind of narcissistic But then, porn addiction, like all the shit. And I was terrified that I would choose that again. Because we know until we don't heal it, we keep recreating these situations unconsciously to try and heal. But I just knew I didn't want to go through that again. And so I have this incredible healing experience where I was able to go and witness myself in that pain. And it's a miracle how my partner and I came together, and God, there's just not an ounce of that in him. And I feel just so grateful and thankful for everything, even my ex-husband, like even everything we went through. And I know he's on his own path, but like every single day I wake up and I'm just like, oh my God, this is my life. This is literally, it's because I was scared. I will tell you, I was terrified. I'm like, I will always choose chaos. I will always choose people that hurt me. Like my definition of love is so effed up. I will always screw it up. I was like really, really scared of that. And it's not. And it's great. And I have stretched my capacity for love for myself, for my partner. And I choose somebody that's really healthy and so loving. And I didn't know if that was going to happen for me. And talk about having to go fully into the fear of that. I did. I just let myself feel the full pain and agony of, you know what? I'm just never going to know love. Maybe it won't happen for me. And I was like, okay with that. I could make that work. And the second I surrendered to that, it was like, no, that's when it happened. It was a really precious experience. And no, I have a partner who's my best friend. Like that's my buddy. That's my person. He's excited for me, compliments me, loves me, like really celebrates me. He's safe. He does his work. And it's really cool that he's sober.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that on such a personal level. I think it means a lot to, for me and also to anybody else who's listening, to have those relatable moments, where we all have different levels of pain in our life. Our histories are not all the same, but they can also be very similar, and there's also thematic experiences that we have that are generally very similar, whether it's violence or sexual things or just condescending or degrading kind of language, that was used in our presence or towards us. And I think most of us can relate to that. So I'm curious about getting really practical now, if you're up for it.
Sure.
Kind of getting into it. Like what, I know how I work, and we all do things just a little bit differently, which is what I love about this community so much in recovery, is that there's such space for all kinds of different ways, and that's the beauty of it. We can do things and we can choose people and ways that fit for us. So I'm curious about you guys, what maybe there's like something like even an exercise that you do on a regular basis you can share with us, or what is something that you use to help women identify these wounds or move past them?
Beautiful. Yeah, I love that question. I mean, the first thing I always do working with people is really get present. And it sounds so obvious, but I think we miss that a lot in therapy, coaching, anything. We want to get to the doing and forget it's all about the being. And so, just even taking a moment and doing that scan, but really doing it, all of these simple little tools that we've heard ever since we were little, you stub your toe, you cry, oh, take a deep breath. And we're like, whatever. It's like, no, these are genuinely the tools.
Right.
And so I think it's really important to check in. And there's such an honoring and reverence when we do that with intentionality of like, I always put one hand on my heart and then one on my kind of my power center, just right where my ribs meet. And I'm like, how am I? Because that's important to me. Like I care how I am doing genuinely. Like, what do you need? Like, how are you? And it's great to fill our cup when we're doing well, and that's an important practice. I think like if I check in and I'm like, yeah, like I'm feeling good. I'm doing well. There's stressors, there's new businesses. My brother's finally, in a medical detox. I mean, like life is still chaotic in many, many ways, but like, yeah, my calm, my center, I'm doing good. I'm eating well, I'm sleeping, I'm taking care of myself, I'm taking time for myself. Like these are the moments I'm going to fill my cup, whatever that is. Like I just did a day spa, like all day, like 9 hours at the spa the other day. Like I capitalize when I'm feeling well. And I think this is an important tool that we don't talk about enough. We like to talk about interventions when we're in a bad state. Well, when you're in a good one, use that to your advantage. Have a full tank for when life comes. But really, that moment of connecting and the research into those 6 deep breaths. There's a lot of research out of Japan that 6 intentional deep breaths will completely reset our fight, flight, freeze. So, I mean, that's so much of our bad behavior, our toxic behavior, our behavior that hurts ourselves is done in that hijacked state. So like really getting present, being able to tell the truth of what we need and where we're at. That is critical. From that space, I don't almost think it matters what you do. If you can get really honest and really present and really in your body. And disassociation, you ask like, what was the root of so much? I mean, my ability to disassociate and just be on autopilot and I don't know what was running me it's phenomenal. I swear like 90% of my childhood I don't remember. So once I was able to get in my body and be with myself, like that was the game changer. But I think like even I was working with a client the other day and it hit me. I can't remember what she said, but I was like, oh, your core belief about yourself is unworthy, And so many of us talk about putting Band-Aids on a compound fracture. It's like when you really, and we grow up with parents, they're not attuned, and it's like, I love you as long as you're pretty or smart or clean your room or shut up or whatever, right? We come into this world just, crapping ourselves, crying all the time, and we're supposed to get love. And then we develop this sense of knowing that like, oh, I'm not okay. Mm-hmm. Oh, I'm annoying. Oh, I'm this. Oh, I'm that. And then, it's like, we don't know what to do with that, a lot of us. And so there is this like unworthy self-loathing. I need to perform. I'm not enough. And when that's our core, that's where we need to work. But what do? We go to all these outside, the leaves instead of the root. Like, oh, we'll fix this thing. Oh, I'll lose 10 pounds. Oh, I'll get a promotion. Oh, well, whatever. And it's like, no, until you love yourself, none of that shit matters. None of it matters. And I think the awareness of that though, like if somebody can really pause and go, what is my core belief? And then be honest about that. That's where the work begins. And mine was, I am not okay. That was my core belief for a long time.
I talked a lot. Thank you so much. I love it. And I think you're right on exactly the path that's necessary for identifying these things in ourselves. And then, okay, then now that we know these things, how can we reverse or change them? Right. And so you talked about core beliefs. I use the term personal core values. That's a huge part of the program that I do as well in my work. And we spend a lot of time digging through lists of words, right? You've probably seen them where you're like trying to pare it down from like 100 words down to like 25, then down to 15, then down to 10 and 5. Because when you get to that core 5, like your true beliefs for yourself, those are your values, then you begin to make decisions in your life through the lens of all of those values. If it doesn't fit into one of those things, then you shouldn't be doing that. Because if you do it, like one of my core values is vitality, and, so when I act out with food and I make choices that are not in alignment with my overall value of vitality, my brain knows that I'm not making a choice according to my core values. And then symptoms like anxiety, sometimes depression or sadness or loneliness start to show up, and it might not be big, huge right away, like in that moment, but it's subtle, and then it increases over time and we get incrementally more dysfunctional, right? Um, so those values and those core beliefs are so critical. I know in my work as a therapist, I do EMDR therapy, which
Beautiful.
our negative beliefs about ourselves is the exact core of the work of EMDR, right? So when I work with somebody to try to establish what that is, sometimes they struggle. They're like, well, I don't know, but we dig down, we dig down, we dig down until we get to that, well, I'm not good enough. I'm
Yes.
unworthy of love. I'm unlovable, things like that. And it takes a minute, right? We got to undo it until we get to that wound. Um,
Yes.
and oftentimes we want to make it about I don't think they're small things, but the obvious things like, well, I'll just lose 10 pounds, or I'll
Yeah.
just start working more, or I'll get out of this relationship. We make it about the external, which
Hmm.
obviously those things can be very hurtful to us. And then making changes can be very helpful to us, but they're not the real core issue. Like you said, it would be like band-aids kind of all around.
Absolutely. And I think, once we do start peeling those layers off, right? Which is what addiction is great at. I mean, you want to be just raw exposed nerve, get sober.
Yeah.
Become an addict and then get sober. And then there you are. And you can tap into those beliefs a lot easier at that vulnerable moment. But I think one of the things we miss that's super important is like, what's the payoff to it? We always look at these behaviors like they're bad and wrong, but it's like, what does it do for you? I mean, internal family systems, I think is awesome. I use that a lot with clients. And it's like, well, how did it serve you? Instead of looking at these behaviors or personality traits or whatever we want to call them as bad, wrong, just stop doing that. It's like, no, how did it serve you? Because I think that's what allows us to soften and work with them intentionally. And when you really understand what those behaviors and ways of being protect, it's like, now I can nurture that part instead of protect it in these ways. And now that's like a much more gentle way, I think, to unravel. And like even that shadow work that's so incredibly precious, it's like, what's the payoff? It
Well, then you
humanizes
have the
it.
ability to then take a look at what can I do instead. Once we start to
Yes.
say like, oh, well, actually that was protecting my heart from this pain, or actually that was keeping me from hurting myself, whatever the thing was, then you can start to be like, oh, okay, well, if overeating and gorging yourself on sugar was soothing yourself with your like the emotional distress you were under and making you feel comfortable and content in your own skin, then we can take a look at obviously we'd want to get to the core beliefs and kind of some of the real reasons why that's going on, and by asking yourself too, like, what's really going on with me right now, what's
Yeah.
happening. But then you can start to say, well, then what can I do instead? Often
Right.
I don't think we get to that part. We don't sit around and be like, well, I could go to Chick-fil-A and get my milkshake, or I could do this. Usually it's just the one thing.
And it's, I can remember when I was trying to get sober and somebody handed me the sheet of like things you could do instead of drink. And it was like, take a bubble bath. And I was just like, you are the biggest idiot on the planet. Like, of course that's not the same. But I think if there was any way that I could sit with and go, okay, what am I experiencing? What am I afraid to feel? What is this covering up? And as we start digging deeper, what's fascinating to me is all these types of behaviors, they always come down to protecting our heart, like feeling love, giving love, having an open heart. But what's fascinating is then these ways of protecting our heart actually close it. So the thing that we're most afraid of getting hurt or not receiving love
Right.
easily, effortlessly, openly, we do. But then we're in control of it, right? Which is the other thing we love. We love to be in control. Like, I'll close my heart, then it's me and it's on my terms. And I think that way too. I mean, obviously sugar is the most addictive substance on the planet. So there's the brain and chemicals, there's a lot of hooks to that. But some of it too is, I think, there's almost this retaliation against life sometimes of like, I am just going to do this. And you're like the rebel in that moment, and I'm going to get my hit, and it's not that bad. And now it's my choice. And there's a way to stay stuck in that patterning. Again, what would be revealed if you just didn't? And sometimes it's like, be the grown up and just sit there and deal with your shit. And I say that with loving compassion, because at the end of the day, it's like, nobody can do that work for you. And we can do all these tricks and, EFT and EMDR and yoga and meditation and sound bowls. And, like, I love all of those things. They help me tremendously. But at the end of the day, sometimes you just have to sit there and deal with it. And that is what I think we're not willing to do.
We're not. Most people are not, because it's very uncomfortable. And also, if you haven't been raised in or lived in an environment where feelings were really welcome or shared or talked about or acceptable, that's very difficult. And even if you have, it can still feel like vulnerability is hard. But the payoff, like you talk about, like when we get vulnerable, like particularly with our partners or our children or people we're very close with, it deepens the emotional connection and intimacy that you have with that person to such a level it's like you couldn't even believe it. Like you thought you were close with your person before, and then now you start to share like some of the really depths of your heart. Well, dang, like that's going to just take your intimacy and emotional intimacy to a much higher level. But it's uncomfortable, and but what we all forget, it's sort of like the drink too, right? It's like the craving for the drink or the food or whatever. What we all forget is feelings are fleeting. They come and go, they come in and out, just like the wind, they pass through. So it will always end. There will be an end. And often it's way faster than we think. Most of the research that I know about talks about things like anxiety and panic attacks. They can only last for 20 minutes,
Yeah.
And so if you can just like set a timer or a craving or whatever, and know that it's going to pass after 20 minutes. And even if it doesn't all the way, the biggest part might, and then it's much more manageable. And most of us can handle pretty much anything for 20 minutes. We just have to be willing.
Well, and that's it. And it's, I think that's the real power is when you go, I'm okay if this doesn't shift. I don't like it, but I will not turn on myself, and I can be with it.
Yeah.
Because that's when it does shift, and it's that intense vulnerability too with somebody. And I want to say too, the boundaries and the core values, like when you find somebody that doesn't violate your boundaries, and when you're not compromising those core values, those two things are important. I'm not saying do this with everyone, but like once you find that and there's somebody safe, it's like being willing to be hurt, being willing to be uncomfortable. That's a part of the magic. And you're right, a craving specifically 90 seconds when we just go, all right, I'm here, bring it. I'm not afraid of you. I'm not giving in. Bring it. It's like, we have to, when I think about like the wise woman archetype, the crone, the embodied mother, yeah, she's not like, oh my God, a feeling. Let me go destroy myself. She's like, yeah, here it is. And it's with compassion and validation and reverence for what she is experiencing. But there is an honoring of like, that thing is not more powerful than her love for herself. And so she is going to stay in that. And I think too, it's practice, just like a craving has been practiced. Dopamine is not the feel-good chemical. It is the motivation chemical. It is the illusion of this thing is going to make me feel better. I'm going to eat that cake and then I'm not going to hate myself. I'm going to take that drink and then I'm not going to be sad. We all know that's not true. None of those things work. They just numb us out to our own feeling, but we're still feeling it. And then we just feel shame about what we did. Right. So it's like, no, it's this, too, when you really understand that, it's like the dopamine is the hit of the illusion. And again, if you are somebody that is new to recovery or relapse or struggling with that, I really have a lot of compassion for that moment when you're like, this thing is going to work. It's going to help me, because we have to remember it did it one time. We didn't become alcoholics because it didn't work.
Exactly.
It worked too well. And then there's that point of diminishing returns where it doesn't anymore. And so it's like, how do we just be with whatever that was allowing us to escape?
Mm-hmm.
And then we don't need that thing. And yeah, you are going to get those dopamine cravings, but remember, it is the anticipation of something that is not real. It is not going to give you that feeling. So why don't you just find a way, like you said, in a healthy way, in a way that's honoring and, respects you and what you're doing and what you're creating in your life, and get that feeling through that avenue. Like, what is that thing? And what's really sad though, for a lot of us, and this is something that I had to come to terms with, I was not going to get it in my life as it was. I needed to get out of my marriage. I needed to get out of that environment. I needed to start choosing me. I needed to respect myself again. And, thank God I never wanted to drink, but had I, that would have been a really dicey time for me, because that would have been a great way to just disappear from it. But it's like, no, getting sober is hard, and staying sober is hard in a sense of sometimes it demands excellence. Good enough will not, you won't tolerate it, and you'll start cutting corners in these other areas, and you may not drink, but you start doing other sloppy things that take you out of yourself. And so it's like, I don't know, the life that we're creating, I think it demands excellence. And I don't say that in a way that's like, you have to perform, you have to be perfect, you have to look a certain way. When I say excellence, I mean true to who you really are, and what is going to be the next level up for you, and what's going to help you open your heart to yourself, to your children, to the world. Like, what is going to give you the best shot at that?
Ooh, all right. I agree. So, Jo, this has been fantastic conversation. I'm so excited about both of the work that we're doing and meeting the women and serving them. And the more people who are doing that just means the more opportunities there are for people to be well, right? To live really well in recovery, because it doesn't have to be boring. It doesn't have to suck. It's actually pretty magical and incredibly deep and powerful and amazing in all the ways. So I'm super excited to finally see your website when it's revealed, and to watch you as you grow. So how can people get a hold of you if they want to?
So recoveryremix.com is the website, and that will be launching very soon. In the meantime, on Instagram, that's where we're the most active. You can find us just at Recovery Remix. We're posting a lot there. We'll be updating when the membership site will be available. Lots of free content on there as well. And then also just always reach out if there's ever anything. Just shoot us a DM, shoot me a DM. And yeah, I really admire too the work that you're doing. Thank you for being such a powerful role model of what it can look like, feel like, long-term recovery, and the service that you are into others. It's always just a real pleasure to be in your space. So thank you for having me back.
Oh, thank you. I'm so thankful for you as well. And I know our paths will cross again many times. So I'll be talking to you soon, I hope.
Love that. Thank you.
Thank you.